Hello and welcome to our London History Podcast, where we share our love of London, its people, places and history in 20-minute espresso shot episodes served with a dash of personality. I am Hazel Baker, qualified London tour guide and CEO of London Guided Walks, providing private tours, treasure hunts and live London quizzes to Londoners and visitors alike. To accompany this podcast, we also have hundreds of London history-related blog posts for you to enjoy at londonguidedwalks.co.uk/blog. Don't forget, from 4th of July, we will be offering private tours, treasure hunts and live London quizzes to private groups, all COVID-19 secure. And now, on with the show. Joining me in the studio today is City of London tour guide Ian McDiarmid. Hello.
Hi there.
All right, so today we are talking about all things coffee. And I don't mean Starbucks, Costa Coffee or Nero. I'm talking about ye old-fashioned coffee houses. So the first question, Ian, that I have for you is, what were coffee houses?
Well, it's a good question, partly because, unfortunately, I don't think there are any surviving coffee houses. We were talking earlier about White, which was a chocolate house, which was in the West End. But apart from that, I don't think there are any. Lloyd's has got the shop front from Lloyd's Coffee House, which was recently displayed in the Maritime Museum in Greenwich. But I think the fact that there aren't any reflects the fact that they were rather ephemeral businesses and they just haven't survived, though obviously it's true that a lot of historical buildings from the city haven't survived. They were places where, as the name suggests, you'd go and drink coffee, and the very important thing for the proprietors of the coffee houses were to distinguish themselves from public houses and taverns. And public houses and taverns had a reputation for being a little bit rowdy, where the meaner sort of people would go, and the coffee houses wanted to distinguish themselves from that. And obviously the trade is centred around coffee, which is, unlike alcohol, is non-intoxicating, though they would in fact sell a range of drinks in coffee houses. And often the clientele of the coffee house was dominated or characterised by the 17th century figure of the Virtuozzo, who was a gentleman who claimed to have learning in a wide range of interests. And coffee houses often fell well short of this ideal, but nevertheless there's a kind of gentlemanly impulse behind them which helped set them off from their competitors.
Yes, and I think you've said it exactly. When you say that's where people will go, you're actually talking about this is where men would frequent.
Yes, we don't have any records of rules saying that women weren't allowed in them, but I think it's fairly well understood that women wouldn't be seen in coffee houses. It wouldn't be seen appropriate for a gentlewoman to be seen in such an establishment. The role of women is important, though, because a lot of the coffee houses had female proprietors, so it's one avenue for female businesswomen. And I was talking about how coffee houses fell short sometimes of their gentlemanly ideal. One constant refrain of criticism against the coffee houses is that in fact they were kind of basically claiming to be upmarket but frequently functioning as brothels, and it almost certainly is the case that a small minority of them did that.
So when did this rage for coffee houses begin, and which was the first one?
Well, the sources are a little bit vague. Some people claim that the first coffee house in England was in Oxford in 1650, and the other claimant to it, which certainly was the first one in London, was one that we visit on our financial walk, which was in St Michael's Alley, and was founded by Pasqua Rosée, probably in or around 1652. And Rosé is a very interesting character. He was the Greek-speaking servant of an English merchant by the name of Daniel Edwards. And servant we need to understand as personal assistant. And Edwards was a member of the Levant Company trading with the Middle East, and he'd been resident in Smyrna, currently Izmir, in Turkey. And Pasqua Rosée was his servant or assistant, and he was primarily employed because of his facility in Turkish and Greek. But one of the things that Rosé was probably useful for was his knowledge of the ways of the workings of the Ottoman Empire. And one thing that he was very good at, which fits in with the role of servant, was making coffee. And Edwards, when he comes back to London with his father-in-law, another merchant by the name of Hodges, decide that it's a good idea to try and sell coffee, and they set Pasqua Rosée up in business against the wall of the Michaels in Cornhill, and the business blooms. And then if we fast forward to the end of the century, we don't have any fast figures on the number of coffee houses in London, but we're probably talking about several hundred. And this distinguishes London from other cities. They have them. Paris has them. Amsterdam has them, but they're much fewer in number. And in some of these countries, like in France and northern Italy, the coffee houses don't have the same boisterous, robust atmosphere as they do in England. They tend to be a bit more upmarket and so different in character.
So I can understand that we've got a unique character for coffee houses here in the UK, but why are you talking about coffee houses on a financial tour of the City of London?
One of the key periods in London's history is the end of the 17th and the beginning of the early 18th centuries. And this is when something that historians refer to as the financial revolution occurred. And it's useful to use this as a short term, even if we can debate the meanings, whether the word revolution is applicable. And what we're seeing in this period is the emergence of modern financial markets. And so in London at this time, you've got the development of the bond market, which particularly depends on the creation of the Bank of England in 1694 and then the issuance of British government debt after that. A little bit earlier than that, you've got the emergence of insurance and share dealing. And these two markets will be particularly closely associated with two particular coffee houses, that of Edward Lloyd. And Lloyd is active by the end of the 80s. In 1691, he moves up to Lombard Street from Tower Street. And marine insurance and ship auctions become an increasingly important part of the activity of his coffee house. And the other one is established by 1680, which is Jonathan's, which again is in and around this area. It's in Exchange Alley. And Jonathan's becomes the main centre for the dealing of shares. And this begins in the 1680s and gets really going in the beginning of the early 18th century. But the general importance of this area of the city, when we go on the walk, we spend a lot of time in around the area called Exchange Alley, which is this little island between Lombard Street, Cornhill to the north, Gracechurch Street to the east. It's a little triangle of land that's delightful to walk in because it's a network of little alleyways, and although the buildings mostly, for the most part, are long gone, it retains the footprint of these little alleyways, and you've got to imagine it full of coffee houses. And it's not just Lloyd's and Jonathan's, which are of extreme importance for the future of development. It's also the whole network of coffee houses that are there. I was saying that London has far more coffee houses than any other city in Europe, apart from Constantinople. The greater part of coffee houses are found in Britain, in London, and within London the greatest concentration is within the city, and within the city the greatest concentration is in and around the Royal Exchange, which is just over the road from the Bank of England, for those not too familiar with the city. And the Royal Exchange was enormously important as a meeting place for merchants. And with the development of coffee houses in and around the Royal Exchange, the business that went on in the Royal Exchange itself spilled out into the coffee houses. And so you've got this concentration of coffee houses in this area, and they would frequently take the name of the area of interest to particular merchants. So today you can see Jamaica, which is since the 19th, was rebuilt in the 19th century and it is now a wine house. But that takes its name from the Jamaica Coffee House, which is where the Jamaica merchants met. On Cornhill, very close to it, was the Barbados Coffee House. Very just around the corner was the Jerusalem, and there were lots of coffee houses like this. Like there was also the Virginia, where merchants would meet. And so it's a bustling mercantile area, and these merchants are very commercially minded, and they've also got money to spend, which helps the development of the financial markets. It helps enormously. They've got all this money to invest, and also they need financial services. They need foreign exchange, they need credit, which is provided in the form of bills of exchange, mainly at this period. And the combination of merchants, the combination of the coffee houses, the Royal Exchange, the foundation of the Bank of England leads to this great expansion and creates this area in London where people come in and they can invest their money in what we call securities, which are bits of paper, maybe in insurance policy or a bond or a share. And these are alternatives to the traditional destination for investment, which would be land. And as I think I probably just implied, one of the great distinctions of paper securities from land is that they are liquid. You can buy and sell them fairly easily.
You paint a very vibrant picture, really, knowing the Exchange Alley and all those small little alleyways where light hardly touches at all. And then, of course, you've got the raucous conversations of all these merchants in the different coffee houses there. And, of course, you've got the messenger boys running around as well. It would have been a very different atmosphere to what we experience there now. So they're in the coffee house. You've said that mostly they served coffee. So what did their coffee taste like? Anything like Starbucks nowadays?
I think to those accustomed to the taste of Starbucks, 17th century coffee would probably have been, shall we say, disgusting. We've got the recipes and we know about the technology that they used to make the coffee. And reading these things, it seems fairly clear that the coffee would have been incredibly bitter to our taste. My understanding is that one of the great developments in modern coffee making is the even roasting of the beans. And if you roast coffee beans by hand in a pan over a fire, what you get is very uneven roasting. So some of the beans get roasted too much and they impart a kind of sooty flavour, and other beans get undercooked and they give a very bitter taste. They would boil the coffee for too long to our taste. And again, this destroys a lot of the aromatic oils that gives coffee its distinctive flavour, again, imparting a bitterness. They would leave the coffee to stew for ages on the heat. So I think in this, we can readily imagine this, because I think in my eyes, very reminiscent of those bulbous, transparent coffee-making things that you find in offices with the brown rims around them. Mm-hmm. And if the level of coffee in those is fairly low, you know that they've been there for a few hours. And if you make the mistake of drinking it, it tastes pretty disgusting. So I think they would have that effect. They would reuse old coffee and mix it with new. And then finally, it would also have granules in it. And there's a description of a satirist at the time who wanted to capture the taste of coffee, and they wrote, this is an anonymous satirist, and they write that it is like a syrup of soot or the essence of old shoes. Now, we shouldn't take this too much at face value because this is a satirist, and also one of the distinguishing things about coffee is that it's an acquired taste. So I think even if you were to give it to an adult today who'd never tasted coffee before, they might have said something similar. But nevertheless, there is something in that, and that word soot recurs an awful lot in contemporaries' descriptions of it. To our taste, pretty awful. But obviously, they did get hooked on it because they went back time and time and again, although quite a few of them. Hook, for example, who's a famous member of the Royal Society, he goes to coffee houses every day, and yet he says in his diary that he doesn't particularly like coffee. So it didn't win over absolutely everybody, and the other attractions of coffee houses were very important. But yeah, I think we can say it was pretty unpleasant, but the important thing, obviously, one of the important things about it is it doesn't make you drunk, unlike a lot of the other drinks available at the time.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And is it true that they used oyster shells to filter the coffee?
Yes, they did use oyster shells to filter the coffee, and one implication of that is the fact that you would get a kind of grittiness in the coffee, so a bit like drinking Turkish coffee now. And obviously contemporary visitors to coffee houses or the modern coffee shops would not like to find sediment for the most part in their drinks.
So you're not really selling it on the flavour factor for coffee. So why were coffee houses so popular?
Well, I think Robert Hooke is a good example. So Robert Hooke was the curator of experiments at the Royal Society, one of the natural philosophers with a wide range of interests in the what we would call the scientific revolution, though they didn't use the word science at the time. And he goes to the coffee houses every day. And yet, as I've already mentioned, he doesn't seem to particularly like coffee, and this hints at the attractions of them. And for somebody like Hooke, he's going to meet men with similar interests. He's meeting men from a whole wide range of walks. So at the Royal Society, he's rather limited to obviously conversing with Royal Society members. In the coffee houses, he can meet a wider range of different people. So he can meet artisans and craftsmen. And he can learn, he can talk to other people and he can learn from them. And more importantly, perhaps for Hook, who was rather an arrogant man, is that he can show off his learning to others. He can find a regular audience for his own ideas. I was talking earlier about the coffee houses in the city often being a venue for merchants like the Jamaica. And what you find with a lot of the coffee houses is that they develop a kind of theme. They have an area of interest, and this is important for the proprietors because it ensures that they will have a regular clientele. So at the Jamaica, a merchant can go in there and he will know that the other people sitting in the coffee houses, in that coffee house, will be knowledgeable about his line of work, and it's a place where he can get new information. And one thing about the coffee houses, which is enormously important, is that they are a source of news. They produce news because they're where the experts meet. Some of them produce newspapers. So Edward Lloyd will produce a newspaper briefly in the 1690s. He produces a list which gives information on ships sailing and the rest of it. So they produce news, and they're also consumers of news because they're places where newspapers can be read. And I was saying that they're also a place for free conversation. And this is one of the things that gets them into trouble because the governments of the day are very suspicious of the coffee houses, and they have a reputation as being hotbeds of seditious politics, and in particular they get associated with the Whigs. Now that's probably not quite fair because there were Tory coffee houses as well, but in the eyes of the government there's a problem with people talking about the government essentially. They're worried about them being seditious, and they're worried about something that they called false news. And false news wasn't just false news in the sense that we would employ the term, but it was also news that came from unofficial sources that the government couldn't control.
You can understand it at the time, though, because we're talking about a period after the execution of Charles I. So Charles II is a new king on the throne, his father having been executed, and now people are talking. You've got this free thought and free speech. What's next? Will his head be on the block next?
Yes, and he obviously is concerned. And I was saying that the coffee houses had a reputation, perhaps unfairly, for being associated with radical politics. Just before Charles comes to the throne, there's a famous club called the Rota Club, in which the Republican Thomas Harrington discusses Republican models for government. And I think this example of the Rota Club becomes indelibly etched in the minds of Charles II and some of his ministers. And in 1675, he actually tries to close the coffee houses down. It doesn't work, and as I say, they keep on expanding. In addition to the conversation and the conviviality and the ability to meet men with common interests, also important is the fact that these coffee houses provide services. You can get your mail forwarded to them if you so wish, and in a way they're functioning as proto-offices in an age which didn't have offices. They're places where they're fulfilling some of the functions of that. And yeah, we shouldn't forget that people just went there for a good time, for conviviality, and they're not just drinking coffee there. Garraway's, which is one of the big ones, is famous for the quality of its cherry wine and sandwiches, so that gives us a good idea of one of the reasons why men went to them.
That's really interesting stuff, Ian. Thanks so much.
Oh, my pleasure.
Now, if you are interested in all of this, we do have several blog posts digging into the matter a little bit more. And also, of course, Ian is available for private Financial London tours, and I'll provide the link in the show notes as well. And you can have him all to yourself. We're going to be taking a bit of a break from providing these weekly podcasts. Don't worry, just for the month of August. I'll be spending the time recording new episodes. So if you want a subject, place or person to be covered in an episode, then now is the time to let me know. We'll be back on 4th of September with a special Great Fire of London edition. It'll be 354 years to the day when the fire was raging through the city. So that'll be a good one to look forward to. If you haven't already written a review, then please, it takes a few moments and it means the world to me. Have a great summer, and I'll see you on the 4th of September.